Some stories don't start with blood or violence. Some begin with a single decision so strange, so unsettling, that history itself tries to forget it. But people still whisper about what happened that warm September day in Palestine, Texas. They whisper because it was not simply a trade, not simply a bad marriage or a cruel husband, but the opening move in a revenge so slow, so patient, and so chilling that the town never recovered from it. If you had been standing outside the Anderson County Courthouse on September 14, 1858, you might have believed you were watching a business deal. A cotton planter handing over a contract. A horse trader nodding as he accepted the papers. But you would have been wrong. You would have been watching a man give away his wife. Part 1. The Trade. The sun was bright that day, white and sharp above the courthouse square. Dust rose with every footstep and every wagon wheel, hanging in the air like a thin veil. Townsfolk had gathered by instinct, drawn by the rumor that something shameful was about to happen. Palestine was a place that lived on stories. And this one promised to be unforgettable. James Henry Garrett stood tall in his dark coat, the picture of confidence. He was a cotton planter with 600 acres of land stretching along the Neches River. He spoke politely. He attended church. He shook hands the correct way. But the people watching now could see something nervous in the tightness of his jaw, something mean in the way his eyes avoided the woman beside him. Her name was Delilah May Garrett. She stood silent, her hands folded, her dress stretched across her large frame. She had once been lively, once played piano at gatherings and laughed in candlelit rooms. But grief had changed her. Illness had settled into her bones. Her world had become smaller each year. She did not speak as her husband prepared to hand her away. Across from James stood Silas Beaumont. He was taller than most men in town, with a lean, weathered face and eyes that never missed a thing. He was known for trading horses across Texas, Kentucky, Arkansas, and Louisiana. His barns were clean, his animals well trained, and his reputation, until recently, had been solid. People said he could look at a horse and see its entire life story from the shape of its legs. Today, he was not here for a horse. A document lay on the table between the two men. James signed first, then Beaumont. A courthouse clerk stamped the page. The crowd watched without breathing. James stepped away. Beaumont stepped forward, and Delilah May, who had spent years trying to be invisible, looked directly at her husband for the first time in months. No one who saw that look ever forgot it. The years leading to the trade. To understand why such a shocking exchange could happen, one must understand the world in which these people lived. In 1858, Palestine, Texas was a place working hard to look important. Cotton money flowed through the county. New brick buildings rose along Main Street. Planters sat on courthouse steps discussing land and politics as though they were senators. James Garrett fit into this world perfectly. Or at least, he tried to. He came from land and inheritance. He carried himself as a gentleman. But he was hungry for more. More land, more respect, more status. His marriage too had been chosen to improve his standing. When he married Delilah Thornton, she had been a prize. Educated, graceful, well-spoken, she came with a dowry and connections that opened doors. But life can twist a person slowly, like the roots of a tree growing in the dark. After the stillbirth of their twin children, Delilah retreated inward. Her grief swallowed her days. Food became one of the few things that brought her comfort. She ate to fill something that could not be filled. Over the next several years, her body grew heavier, her spirit quieter. Her world shrank to the rooms of the house. Townspeople whispered. James's pride curdled into embarrassment. Then into resentment. He stopped sitting with her. Stopped speaking to her. Stopped seeing her. In a different time, in a different place, their story might have ended with heartbreak and silence. But Palestine had its own characters. And one of them was Silas Beaumont. The beginning of a grudge. In June of that same year, Silas had sold James a young gelding. Strong build, fine shape. James paid handsomely. But weeks later, when the horse became lame, James accused Silas of selling a damaged animal. He told everyone he met that Beaumont was a cheat. In a small county where every handshake mattered, that accusation was poison. When Silas returned from a trading trip and heard what had been said in his absence, he confronted James. Not with anger, not with shouting, just a quiet correction said in front of the town's planters at the Agricultural Association meeting. Any man who cannot judge a horse for himself should not blame the seller. James tried to laugh it off, tried to shrug in front of the other men. But humiliation burns slow and deep. It eats a man from the inside. And Silas saw it. What no one understood that day was this. The insult was exactly the seed Silas needed. The offer no one expected. Weeks later, when James began to complain louder about his wife, louder about how she weighed him down, louder about how she kept him from the life he deserved, Silas was listening. He approached carefully, calmly, as though offering a favor between acquaintances. If she is a burden, I will take her. No shouting, no threats, just the suggestion placed like a coin on a table. And James, swallowed by pride and bitterness, agreed. The stallion in exchange for the wife. Silas never raised his voice, never explained himself, but he smiled, and those who saw that smile remembered it for the rest of their days. Because it was not the smile of a man who had won. It was the smile of a man who had begun. End of part 1. When you're ready, say, continue with part 2, and I'll move into the dark turn, the beginning of the quiet revenge and the strange life Delilah begins under Silas's roof. Part 2. Hook. Revenge does not always shout. Sometimes it sits quietly, listening, learning, waiting for the moment when a single move can bring an entire life crashing down. Many believed the horse trader, Silas Beaumont, made his offer out of impulse. But the truth is far more chilling. He had studied James Garrett. He had studied his wife. He had studied the entire Garrett household. And when he finally spoke his terms, it was not madness. It was strategy. The trade was not the beginning of the story. It was the first trap closing. Part 2. The terms. The summer of 1858 lay heavy over Palestine, Texas. The days were thick with heat that slowed the blood and made tempers short. The town was growing and proud of itself, full of new brick buildings, church gatherings, and men boasting about cotton prices over whiskey. Beneath that confidence lived the strict rules of Southern honor, the idea that a man's reputation mattered more than his comfort, sometimes even more than his family. It was here, in this world of polished manners and private bitterness, that Silas began to prepare. People remembered the confrontation that had occurred months earlier at the Agricultural Association meeting. James had mocked Silas in front of planters whose respect determined business. The insult was sharp and public. A man like Silas would never forget it. But instead of reacting in anger, Silas watched. And he listened. He began by asking quiet questions. Not in a suspicious way, but in the slow, friendly manner of a man who traded horses and always needed conversation to pass the time. He spoke with the Garrett household servants when they came to town for supplies, asking how the family was doing, how the house ran, how often the lady of the house came downstairs. He rode to Crockett, where Delilah's family lived. He asked after her father, claiming he had heard about a mare for sale and wished to see it. While admiring the horse, he spoke gently, even kindly, about Delilah. Her health, her happiness, her daily life. Then he attended church, not to pray, though he bowed his head with everyone else. He sat in the back row, watching the Garretts. Watching how James walked ahead of his wife. Watching how Delilah kept her eyes low, her hands folded, her body still. To the people of Palestine, it looked like a man showing polite curiosity. In truth, it was a hunter learning the path of his prey. The arrival with the stallion. On the morning of September 10th, everything changed. Beaumont rode up to the Garrett plantation accompanied by a sound that turned heads before the man even came into view. The sharp, clean rhythm of hooves on packed earth. When the horse appeared, the house servants stopped what they were doing and stared. The animal was magnificent. A Morgan stallion, tall and strong, its coat almost black except where the sunlight revealed strokes of warm brown. Its neck arched with the power of breeding. Its steps were confident yet calm. This was not just a horse. It was status shaped into muscle and bone. James came outside immediately. The look on his face said everything. Desire, admiration, hunger. The kind of hunger that eats reason. James walked slow circles around the stallion, inspecting every detail with the care of a man who knew exactly what he was looking at but could hardly believe it was being offered to him. "What is your price?" he finally asked. Silas did not smile. He did not joke. His voice was flat and calm. "I am not here to sell him. I am here to trade." James blinked in confusion. He said he owned nothing equal to such value. But Silas did not rush. He spoke with the same slow certainty he used when breaking a difficult horse. "That depends on what a man considers valuable." He then looked toward the upstairs window. A curtain moved. Someone was watching, and James followed his eyes. The offer landed like a stone thrown into still water. "I will trade you this stallion," Silas said, "clear title, no conditions, in exchange for your wife." The yard seemed to grow silent. Even the birds went quiet. At first, James reacted the way any man might. Shock, anger, disbelief. He said it was impossible. He said no law would recognize such a thing. But Silas had done his homework. He had already spoken to Judge Patterson. Already prepared written documents. Already gathered information about Delilah's family, her dowry, her daily life, her isolation, her lack of social contact. He knew James was unhappy. He knew James was proud. He knew James believed his wife held him back. The words Silas spoke next did not persuade. They revealed, "Your marriage has already ended in every way except on paper. Your wife has not left the house in years. You do not speak to her. You speak of her with shame. The world already sees your separation. I am offering to make it official." James stopped pacing. His breathing changed. Silas continued, "Your wife is educated. She can run accounts. She can manage a household. I have need of a woman who can do such things. I do not require more." He left the rest unsaid. And that silence was louder than any argument. James hesitated. Pride softened into calculation. He asked how such a thing could be recorded. Silas reached into his coat and produced a folded paper. The language was careful. The notary was willing. The process was ready. James only needed to agree. And Delilah only needed to sign. The decision. For a long moment, James stared at the stallion, his hand resting gently on its strong shoulder. His face softened into something almost childlike. Want. Enough to blind him to everything else. And while he stared, Silas watched him with the same expression he had worn when training horses. Not admiration. Understanding. He already knew how this would end. Because the trap had been set long before the offer was spoken. End of part 2. When you are ready, say. Continue with part 3. In part 3, we follow what happens when Delilah is told about the agreement, and the first hint of the real horror begins. Got it. I will now rewrite this as part 3, same story tone, 1000 words, simple clear American English, smooth for narration, no dashes, engaging hook first, and written as historical horror building tension slowly. Here is part 3. Part 3, Hook. People in Palestine believed the scandal ended the day Delilah rode away with Silas Beaumont. They thought the courthouse scene was the shocking part, the thing people would whisper about for years. But the real story did not begin there. The true story began miles away, on that quiet stretch of land west of town, where no neighbors lived close enough to hear a voice calling for help. What happened in that house did not resemble a marriage, nor a business agreement, nor any arrangement anyone in town could imagine. This was something else, something older, something patient, and Delilah was walking straight into it. Part 3, The House of Silas Beaumont. The ride from the courthouse to Beaumont's property took less than an hour, but to Delilah it felt like traveling out of her old life entirely. She kept her hands folded in her lap while the wagon rolled past cotton fields, farmhouses, crossroads, and the winding edges of the piney woods. She recognized every landmark, yet everything felt strange, as though the world had shifted just a few degrees off-center. Beaumont did not speak. He guided the horses with calm focus. He never hurried, never rushed his movements. His silence was not avoidance. It was control. At the property, the house came into view. A small timber building, neat and strong. The barn behind it was larger, almost impressive. A place built by someone who valued animals more than comfort. 3 men saw them approach. They stopped their work and watched in silence. Beaumont helped Delilah down from the wagon, his touch gentle but firm. He introduced Abraham, the older man who managed the house in his absence. Abraham's greeting was polite, respectful, but his eyes revealed curiosity. And something else. Something like concern. Abraham showed her inside. The house smelled of pine, smoke, and horses. Simple but clean, small but functional. 2 bedrooms, a main room, a kitchen with a stove that must have been expensive for the region. Everything arranged with purpose, not beauty. This house was not built to host visitors. This was a house built for waiting. The first evening, Abraham explained the routines, the work, the meals, the men, then left her alone to explore the space that was now, legally, her home. She walked slowly through the rooms, her fingers brushing wood worn smooth by use. No lace, no decoration, nothing unnecessary, a house without sentiment. She felt no fear, not yet. When Beaumont returned later that evening, he found her at the table reviewing his ledgers. Numbers steadied her. Numbers made sense. You work quickly, he said. His voice held the same calm tone as always. You have records. Missing, she replied. Your feed costs are wrong. Someone is taking advantage of you. His expression changed slightly. Not surprise. Approval. They talked long into the night. They outlined responsibilities, expectations, boundaries. She would manage the domestic world. He would handle the horses and the land. The agreement was work, not enslavement. She would have autonomy, and that word mattered more to her than marriage ever had. She went to bed that night with a strange lightness. A feeling close to awakening. She did not see the shape that stood outside her window, watching her as she slept. Not Beaumont. Something else. The new order. In the weeks that followed, the farm began to change. Not quickly, but noticeably. Delilah organized the household. She improved meals. She balanced accounts. She met suppliers and negotiated prices. The handlers, Curtis and Martin, adapted easily to her presence. Abraham became her closest ally, his soft voice and deep experience guiding her through the unspoken rules of life far from town. She woke early, worked steadily, ate regularly, and her body began to respond. Her breath came easier, her steps grew firmer, her face regained color, her hands grew steady and sure. People in Palestine said later that she seemed to come alive out there. They also said she changed. Not in the simple way of someone improving their health, but in her eyes, in her voice, in the way she walked. As if she had remembered something long buried. Abraham noticed it first. One evening he said to her quietly, while they shelled peas at the kitchen table, "Miss Delilah, you do not look like a woman who lost anything. You look like a woman waiting." She did not answer, because she did not know what she was waiting for. Only that it was coming. The first sign, the first strange occurrence happened on a moonless night, just as summer began to edge toward fall. Curtis and Martin had taken 2 horses into the far pasture. Abraham had gone to bed. Beaumont was away on business. The house stood quiet except for the sound of the stove cooling. Delilah sat at the table finishing correspondence. Then she heard it. Not footsteps. Breathing. Slow. Heavy. Just behind her. She turned. No one stood there. But the air felt thick. As if someone had recently been standing in that exact space. She exhaled and forced herself to return to writing. Then the kitchen lamp flickered. Once. Twice. Then went out. The house plunged into darkness. She sat perfectly still, listening. The breathing returned, this time closer. She rose from the table, her hand searching for a match. Then she heard a whisper. Soft, gentle, not threatening, but familiar. Delilah, not her husband's voice, not Beaumont's voice. A voice she had not heard in 3 years. Her mother's voice. Delilah's breath caught in her chest. Her hand froze. The whisper came again, this time closer, this time clearer. You are not alone here. The lamp suddenly flared back to life on its own. The room appeared exactly as it had before. Except for one change. On the table, beside the papers she had been writing on, lay a single white thread. Neatly coiled, delicate, perfect. The thread from her wedding dress. The dress that had been packed away for years. Locked in a trunk in the garret house. Far from here. Delilah sat down slowly. Her hands did not shake. Her voice did not tremble. She simply whispered back, very softly. I know. End of part 3. When you are ready, say. Continue with part 4. In part 4, we will reveal the first truth about the Beaumont property and why silence was always part of the agreement. Got you. I'll continue the story into part 4 with a strong hook, simple and clear language, and around 1,000 words. No dashes. Part 4. Hook. Some people say horror does not arrive with screams. It comes quietly. It comes in the small changes no one notices at first. A strange sound behind a door. A habit that shifts. A person who begins to move just a little differently. That was how it began at the Beaumont property. Not with blood or violence. But with silence. With stillness. With a look that lasted too long. Part 4. Autumn came to Anderson County slowly. The nights grew cooler. The oak trees began to thin. The cotton fields turned dusty and pale. At the Beaumont property, work continued as usual. Horses needed feeding. Ledgers needed balancing. Supplies had to be ordered. No one spoke of the courthouse event anymore, at least not openly. But the land itself held attention, as if it remembered what others tried to forget. Delilah May had now lived on the property for nearly 6 weeks. Her routine had settled into something steady. She woke before sunrise to boil water and set out breakfast. Abraham joined her soon after, usually humming an old tune under his breath. Curtis and Martin came in half awake and grateful for hot coffee. The morning always felt calm then. Comfortable. Safe. But the calm did not last. It was the nights that changed first. At the Garrett house, Delilah had always slept lightly. The house had been too big and too quiet. At Beaumont's property, the nights should have been easier. The rooms were small and warm. The walls were thick. The sound of wind moving across the pasture was steady and soothing. Yet she woke often, her breath caught in her chest, as if something had touched her while she slept. The first time it happened, she thought it was a dream. A whisper, a soft voice close to her ear. Just her name, nothing more. Delilah. She sat up in bed that night, heart pounding. The room was empty. The lamp beside her bed had burned itself low, a faint orange glow casting shadows that stretched long and thin across the wooden floor. She waited for the voice to come again. It did not. The next morning she told no one. But it happened again, and again. Delilah. Sometimes soft, sometimes sharp, sometimes almost pleading. By the 4th night she began sleeping with the lamp lit. The flame danced against the window and the sound of wind felt too close. The horses in the barn grew restless on those nights as well. Curtis mentioned it during breakfast. Never seen them like that, he said. They act like something is walking through the stalls. Something they can smell but not see. Abraham glanced at Delilah when he said this. Not with suspicion, but with concern. Animals sense things before people do, he murmured. Delilah pretended not to hear him. During the days, things remained ordinary. Or at least appeared to be. She worked on the ledgers. She scrubbed shelves. She wrote letters to suppliers and merchants. She taught Abraham how to prepare stews her mother had once served at winter gatherings. Her hands stayed busy. Her mind stayed focused. Beaumont returned every few days to review the business decisions she had made. He said little, but she could see he was impressed. His operation was growing. Other breeders were speaking his name with respect again. Yet when he looked at Delilah, there was something else in his eyes now. A quiet observation. A question he did not ask. She knew he could tell something had changed. One evening, after the men had gone to the barn, Beaumont approached her while she was sorting correspondence. He stood with his hands behind his back, watching her for a long moment. You are not sleeping, he said finally. She paused but did not look up. I sleep enough. No, he replied. You do not. I hear you walking at night. Her hand froze on the page. She did not ask how he knew. He stepped closer, not threatening, just steady, firm. Tell me what wakes you. She closed her eyes. The room felt very still. A voice, she said quietly. I hear a voice. It says my name. Beaumont did not react with disbelief or fear. He simply nodded, as though she had said something entirely expected. Some houses carry what happened inside them, he said, but this house has seen nothing like that. This land is old though. Some things cling to old land. You should not face it alone. His words should have been comforting. They were not, because she had not told him the rest. It was not just a voice now. 3 nights ago, while she lay awake staring at the ceiling, she had seen something reflected in the window's glass. A figure standing behind her. A shape, a shadow, a woman, tall and dark, her face obscured. Not moving, not breathing, just watching. When Delilah turned, the room was empty. She did not tell Beaumont this. That night, she went to bed early, exhausted. She left the lamp burning bright beside her. The flame flickered against the walls, shadows trembling and shrinking. She closed her eyes. She did not sleep. Sometime after midnight, the temperature in the room shifted. Not a breeze, not a draft, a presence, cold and heavy. Her lamp flickered. The flame stretched upward, thin and trembling. Delilah opened her eyes. The figure was standing at the foot of her bed. Closer than before, clearer. She saw the woman's shape now. A dress, long, old-fashioned, not of this time. Her hair hung loose over her shoulders. Her head tilted as if studying Delilah. Her face slowly lifted, but before Delilah could see it fully, the lamp went out. And the room fell into darkness. Would you like me to continue to part 5 now? Just say continue part 5. All right, here is part 5 with a strong hook, simple language, smooth pacing, and no dashes or long dashes anywhere. Part 5, Hook. A haunting does not always begin with horror. Sometimes it begins with curiosity. A question that should never be asked. A memory that should stay buried. What followed in Beaumont's house after that night was not only fear. It was recognition, as if something had been waiting for Delilah May for a very long time. Part 5. The moment the lamp went out, the room became heavy and dark. Delilah could not see the shape anymore, but she felt it near her. A coldness rested at the foot of her bed, almost like a person sitting there. She tried to speak, tried to call for Abraham or Beaumont, but her voice stuck in her throat. She could only breathe shallow and quick, her heart racing hard enough to hurt. Then, as quietly as it had come, the presence lifted. The weight eased, the room warmed again, the flame of the lamp flickered back to life on its own. Delilah sat upright, shaking. She did not sleep again that night. The next morning, the men noticed the change in her. Curtis asked if she was feeling sick. Abraham watched her longer than usual, his eyes searching her face for answers she did not offer. Even the horses in the paddocks lifted their heads when she passed, ears forward, as if they sensed something following close behind her. Beaumont arrived later that evening. The moment he stepped through the door, his eyes went to her. She did not speak, but he seemed to understand something had worsened. "We are going for a walk," he said. They walked beyond the barn, toward the edge of the pasture where the fence line met the woods. The light was low and golden. The air smelled of dry leaves. For a few minutes, they walked in silence. "Tell me everything," Beaumont said finally. She told him. The voice, the figure, the cold, the presence that seemed to grow stronger each night. And she told him something else, something she had not said to anyone. "I do not think it is a stranger," she said. "I think it knows me." Beaumont stopped walking. His jaw tightened, but he did not speak. "Not right away. There are stories about this land," he said at last. "Stories older than this town. Before the cotton fields, before the houses, before any of us. I did not think they mattered anymore." Delilah turned to him. "What kind of stories?" He did not answer. Instead, he began walking back toward the house. That night, Beaumont ordered everyone to sleep in the main room. Abraham slept in a chair near the stove. Curtis and Martin slept on pallets near the table. Delilah rested on the sofa with a blanket pulled to her chin. No one mentioned ghosts, or spirits, or curses, but no one slept. The woods outside were restless. Branches scratched the windows. The horses snorted and kicked in their stalls. The wind did not blow, yet the trees creaked like something moved among them. When morning came, every face in the room looked drawn and pale. The next day, Abraham prepared a pot of tea using dried herbs he kept wrapped in cloth. He brewed it slowly, with great care. When he handed the cup to Delilah, his hands were steady. "This helps keep spirits away," he said. "My grandmother taught me when I was young. It does not stop them, but it may keep them from touching you." Delilah took a sip. The taste was bitter and strong. It warmed her throat, then her chest. Some of the fear eased, but not enough. That afternoon, she walked to the barn to check the feed supply. The air smelled of hay and warm animal breath. Curtis was brushing one of the young mares. Martin was oiling saddle straps. The familiar work brought a sense of calm. Until she saw the mare's eyes. The animal was staring at something behind Delilah. Something in the empty doorway. Its ears laid back. Its muscles stiffened. Delilah turned slowly. Nothing was there, but she felt it. Watching, listening, learning her. That night, she dreamed. She was standing in a field of tall grass under a gray sky. The air was still. No wind. No sound. A woman stood across the field, facing away, her back straight, her hair long and dark. The woman began to turn. Delilah woke before she saw the face. Her breath came fast. Sweat dampened her collar. The lamp flickered again. The flame stretched tall and thin, the way it had before the figure appeared. She stood up. She did not want to sleep again. She walked quietly to the kitchen for water. As she passed the window, something moved outside. A shape in the yard. Not a man, not an animal, a woman, standing still, facing the house. Delilah froze. Her breath stopped. The woman did not approach. She simply waited. After a long moment, she faded into the darkness so slowly it looked like she was stepping backward into air. In the morning, Delilah finally broke. She went to Beaumont as soon as he returned from the stables. "I need answers," she said. "Not stories. Not hints. The truth." Beaumont stared at her for a long time. Then he said, "Come with me." He led her to the old storage building at the far end of the property. It was a place she had not been inside before. The boards were weathered. The door creaked when Beaumont pushed it open. Inside was a wooden chest covered in dust. Beaumont knelt and opened it. Inside were letters, old papers, a book with pages yellowed and curling. And at the very bottom, a small framed portrait. Beaumont lifted the portrait and handed it to Delilah. The woman in the picture wore a dress like the one in the dreams. Her hair hung the same way. Her posture was the same. Her eyes were dark and intense. Her name was Annabel Ward, Beaumont said. She lived on this land long before I did. Some say she never left. Delilah stared at the portrait. The woman's face was the same one she had almost seen in her room. The same one standing in the yard. Beaumont spoke again, his voice low. She died in childbirth, but people say death did not agree to take her. Delilah's hands trembled around the frame. And then Beaumont asked the question she had been avoiding. "Why do you think she is following you?" Delilah did not answer. Because she already knew. She just did not want to believe it. "If you want, say continue part 6 and I'll move the story deeper into the haunting and the truth behind Annabel Ward." "Understood. Here is part 6 with strong engaging hook, simple and clear language for an American YouTube audience. No dashes or dashes like punctuation. Smooth horror tone continuing the story. Part 6. Hook. Some hauntings begin with fear. This one began with recognition. Delilah had not spoken the truth aloud yet, but the spirit already knew. The woman in the portrait was not only tied to the land. She was tied to Delilah herself. And whatever connected them went deeper than death. Part 6. Delilah stood in the dim light of the storage room holding the portrait of Annabel Ward. The dust in the air shimmered where sunlight passed through cracks in the wooden walls. The silence pressed in heavy and close. Her voice was quiet when she spoke. "I have seen her before." Beaumont did not react right away. His face showed no surprise. Only a tired acceptance. "I suspected as much," he said. Delilah set the portrait down carefully and stepped back as if distance could soften the truth. But the truth followed her like a shadow. "Tell me what happened here," she said. "Tell me who she was." Beaumont rested his hand on the lid of the chest. He looked older than he ever had before. Annabel Ward came to this land with her husband in 1842. He was a farmer. She was a teacher. People said she was gentle and kind and wise. The kind of woman others trusted. Delilah listened, still and focused. But something happened after her child was born, Beaumont continued. She became quiet. She walked the fields alone at night. She spoke of voices in the dark. No one believed her. They said it was grief. Or nerves. Or foolish imagination. Did she die here? Delilah asked. No, she walked into the woods one night and never came back. People searched for a week. They found nothing. No body. No clothing. No sign at all. It was as if the woods had opened and taken her. Delilah felt her heartbeat in her fingertips. And the baby? She asked. Beaumont did not answer at first. When he finally spoke, his voice was steady but low. The child survived. A girl. She was sent to relatives in Louisiana. No one in Palestine ever heard what became of her. Delilah closed her eyes. Because she already knew. Because she had known all along. When she opened her eyes, her voice was faint. My mother was from Louisiana. Beaumont did not move. She never spoke of her family, Delilah continued. She never said where she came from. But she always feared the woods. She always prayed over me. Even when I was grown. Beaumont stepped closer. There are old things in this land. Old ties. Old claims. Blood remembers what people forget. Delilah shook her head, though she felt the truth settling heavy inside her. Why would she come to me now? Beaumont took a breath. Because your life changed. Because you left the house where you were silent and unseen. Because here you are becoming yourself again. And maybe she is drawn to that. Or maybe she is warning you. Delilah felt her chest tighten. Warning me from what? Beaumont's eyes darkened. From what is coming. That evening, the house felt different. The air held a kind of waiting. The sun lowered into orange and then red. The shadows grew long and sharp. The horses paced their stalls and would not settle. Abraham lit 3 lamps in the kitchen instead of 1. Delilah moved through the rooms slowly, checking windows and doors. She felt the presence again. Not in the room, not in sight, but near, always near. When night finally came, no one tried to sleep. They all gathered in the main room again. Abraham sat near the stove with a Bible in his hands. Curtis sharpened a knife though the blade needed no sharpening. Martin watched the windows. Delilah sat at the table with the portrait of Annabel in front of her. Only Beaumont remained calm. He stood by the door, listening to the night as if waiting for something specific. The wind rose. The horses kicked and whinnied. The sound of hoofs striking wood echoed across the yard. The lamp flames stretched tall and thin again. Abraham whispered a prayer. Curtis stopped sharpening. Martin stood. Delilah's chair creaked as she rose. The room temperature dropped. Cold pressed against their skin-like hands. The lamps flickered once, twice, then steadied. A soft sound came from outside. Footsteps in the yard. Slow, even, approaching the door. No one moved. The footsteps stopped. The doorknob turned without a sound. The door did not open. Instead, the voice came from just outside. Close enough to feel. You are mine, Delilah gasped. The voice was not angry. Not cruel. It was sad. Full of longing. It sounded like someone calling home a lost child. Beaumont reached for Delilah and put himself between her and the door. You cannot have her, he said. Silence followed. Then a whisper came through the cracks in the wood. Not in words. In breath. A promise. The temperature lifted. The lamps returned to normal. The horses quieted. But the presence did not leave. It simply stepped back into the night. The room remained frozen in fear for several minutes before anyone spoke. It is no haunting, Abraham said softly. It is a claiming. Delilah's hands trembled where they rested on the table. The portrait of Annabel seemed to look back at her with eyes she now recognized. Eyes that could have been her own. Beaumont met her gaze. We need help, he said. Real help. From where? Curtis asked. Beaumont answered. From the one place everyone fears. The old mission house beyond the river. There is a woman there who knows these things. Delilah stood, her decision already made. We leave at dawn. No one argued, but none of them understood the truth yet. The spirit did not want Delilah dead. The spirit wanted her home. If you want, say continue part 7, and I will take the story into the journey to the abandoned mission house and the woman who knows the truth behind the haunting. Here's a fully modified and engaging part 7 of your horror historical story, written in simple English for an American YouTube audience, following your requested style. Part 7. The Shadows of Vengeance. The sun rose over Beaumont's property with an almost unnatural calm, the kind that belied the storm of consequences yet to unfold. Birds sang in the corrals and the horses shifted in the paddocks, their powerful muscles gleaming in the morning light. Delilah May Garrett moved through the house with quiet efficiency, her presence now fully woven into the rhythm of the property. She had transformed Beaumont's household into a model of order and productivity, yet outside that calm lay a tension that no ledger or chore could manage. Word of the courthouse transaction had not died. Though the elite in Palestine pretended ignorance, gossip traveled faster than any legal record. Rumors painted Delilah May's departure in shades of scandal, some claiming she had been forced into the arrangement, others hinting at her complicity in a scheme that defied moral and social law. Few, however, suspected the depth of Silas Beaumont's true plan. Beaumont, for his part, remained inscrutable. To visitors and workers, he was calm, almost indifferent. Yet in private, his strategy was unfolding like a chess game with pieces placed years in advance. Each move James Garrett had made in public, every insult hurled in front of the Agricultural Association, had been catalogued, analyzed, and stored in Beaumont's memory. This was not merely revenge, it was a study in precision, designed to expose the weaknesses of a man who believed himself untouchable. Delilah May observed the quiet efficiency of the day's routine. She had learned to care for the animals, oversee the workers, and manage the accounts, but a part of her remained detached. Her thoughts often drifted back to the courthouse, to the way James had looked when he signed the documents. There had been disbelief, calculation, and then something that might have been pride. She wondered if he realized that his own arrogance had led him into a trap from which he could not escape. It was mid-afternoon when a rider appeared on the horizon, kicking up dust along the road. Curtis Yarbrough squinted and raised a hand. "That's someone coming fast. Looks like a messenger." Delilah May instinctively felt a pang of unease. Beaumont was rarely present, yet he anticipated the needs of his operation as though he were everywhere at once. The rider approached, breathless and wide-eyed, carrying a sealed envelope. Beaumont read the message quickly, his expression remaining calm. He nodded once to himself, then handed the envelope to Delilah May. "Your husband," he said quietly. Her hands trembled slightly as she broke the seal. The letter was brief, polite on the surface, but heavy with a sense of impending frustration. James Garrett was upset. His crops had been delayed, accounts mismanaged, and word had reached him that Beaumont's property was thriving in ways he had not anticipated. Beaumont leaned against the porch railing, watching her. "You understand," he said, "that this letter is a reaction, not the cause. Every step he takes now plays into what we have set in motion." Delilah May nodded, a chill crawling along her spine. She had known that taking control of the household meant stepping into a larger game, one she barely understood. Yet there was a strange satisfaction in it, a sense that she was no longer merely surviving but actively shaping her circumstances. Over the next week, messages from James Garrett became more frequent and frantic. Each one was delivered with the same polite civility that masked his anger and desperation. He demanded accounts, threatened legal action, and tried to appeal to Delilah May's sense of propriety. But she no longer relied solely on Beaumont for guidance. She responded with reasoned letters, detailing finances, crops, and operations with clarity and precision. Each response subtly reminded James of how much he had underestimated her, and by extension, how much he had underestimated Beaumont. By mid-September, the impact of the courthouse transaction began to ripple through Palestine. Neighbors noticed James Garrett riding his new Morgan stallion along the dusty roads, a picture of wealth but with an expression increasingly clouded by uncertainty. Crops that had once been under his direct supervision suffered from mismanagement by foremen who had quietly shifted loyalty. Rumors suggested that the Garrett name, once synonymous with respectability, was now being questioned among planters and merchants alike. At Beaumont's property, Delilah May's confidence grew. The workers followed her instructions without hesitation. Abraham's guidance and Curtis and Martin Yarbrough's skill ensured that the operation ran smoothly. The house was orderly, the books balanced, and the livestock thriving. Yet she felt a shadow of something darker, a sense that this success was part of a larger design, one orchestrated by a man whose cunning she was only beginning to appreciate. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Beaumont called Delilah May to the porch. The air was thick with the scent of hay and the faint metallic tang of horses. "Look at this," he said, pointing toward the horizon. Smoke was rising from the Garrett plantation. Not a fire of destruction, but clouds of dust from overworked fields and frustrated laborers. James Garrett's attempts to assert control were faltering. His orders were misinterpreted, his workers distracted, and the crops began to suffer. Delilah May felt a thrill of realization. Beaumont had not just removed her from one household, he had exposed the fragility of another, showing how a single man's arrogance could unravel an entire empire. She understood now that she was part of a calculated plan, one that required patience, intelligence, and discipline. This was not merely revenge. It was education in the harshest form. That night, as the house settled into quiet, Delilah May sat with her ledgers and a candle, reflecting on the week. She thought of the courthouse, the crowd, and the way she had stepped into a new world with little more than her wits and skill. She realized that her life had become a story of transformation, one in which humiliation had been turned into power, restriction into freedom, and betrayal into mastery. And somewhere in Palestine, James Garrett would learn that every insult, every misstep, every failure to respect the intelligence and autonomy of others could be turned against him. The seed of vengeance had been planted, and it was growing faster than he could anticipate. Delilah May closed her ledger and looked toward the horizon, where the last rays of sunlight glinted on the barn's roof. A new chapter was beginning, not just for her, but for the people of Anderson County who would witness the slow, inexorable fall of a man who had believed himself untouchable. The shadows of vengeance stretched long and dark, but in them, Delilah May found a strange clarity, a sense that justice, however unconventional, had finally found its measure. If you want, I can continue and craft Part 8 immediately so the story flows seamlessly toward the climax. Do you want me to do that? Here's a fully modified and engaging Part 8 of your horror historical story, written for an American YouTube audience in simple, easy-to-follow language. Part 8. The Web Titans. The early October morning air carried a chill that hinted at the approaching winter, yet the fields west of Palestine remained alive with movement. Horses stamped impatiently in the corrals, and the faint smell of sawdust and hay mixed with the earthy aroma of damp soil. Delilah May Garrett moved among the workers with quiet authority, her presence now fully respected on Beaumont's property. Each command she gave was followed without hesitation, and each ledger she updated reflected a system so precise that even the most experienced hands were impressed. Life on the property had changed dramatically since that courthouse morning. Delilah May's transformation was visible not only in her posture and energy but also in her confidence. She walked with purpose, spoke with clarity, and handled challenges with a calm decisiveness that even Beaumont admired. The hours of labor, planning, and meticulous organization had reshaped her into a woman who could command respect in ways she had never imagined possible at the Garrett house. But with authority came new responsibilities, and new dangers. Word of her arrival at Beaumont's property had reached Palestine, and the town buzzed with curiosity and thinly veiled judgment. Some whispered that she had been stolen or coerced. Others speculated that Beaumont had designs far more sinister than managing horses and household accounts. James Garrett, meanwhile, grew increasingly desperate, his letters now filled with veiled threats and attempts to undermine her authority. It was on a crisp October afternoon that Delilah May first saw the results of her influence. James Garrett had ordered a shipment of supplies that had been mismanaged at the last minute, creating shortages in the fields. Her letters of correction, detailing accounts and instructing the foreman, reached the workers quickly, restoring order. But more importantly, they highlighted James's incompetence. Word spread quietly among the laborers that the Garrett's former mistress was now the one in control, and respect shifted toward her. Beaumont, observing from his porch, smiled at the subtle unfolding of his plan. "You see," he said one evening as they reviewed ledgers, "every action he takes now feeds into the structure we've built. His mistakes, his frustrations, even his pride, they are tools. And you, Delilah, are the engineer. Delilah May nodded, understanding fully for the first time that her role extended far beyond mere household management. She was orchestrating a larger strategy, one designed to ensure that James Garrett felt the consequences of underestimating both her and Beaumont. She kept meticulous records, noted every discrepancy in his letters, and planned each response with the precision of a general directing troops. By the third week of October, whispers in Palestine had grown louder. Merchants noticed James struggling to maintain order in his business dealings, his shipments delayed and accounts muddled. Farmers remarked on the sudden efficiency of Beaumont's property, comparing the orderly operations and healthy stock to the Garrett plantation, which now appeared chaotic. Pride, once James's greatest weapon, became his greatest vulnerability. Delilah May also began to notice subtle shifts in Beaumont's staff. Curtis and Martin Yarbrough were more attentive than ever, their work ethic sharpened by her leadership. Abraham, whose wisdom had always guided her, became an invaluable advisor in navigating the complexities of both commerce and local politics. Together, they created a network of control that extended beyond the property itself, quietly influencing events in Palestine. One evening, a messenger arrived with a letter marked urgent. Delilah May opened it carefully and read the words aloud. "Your husband demands an immediate accounting of all operations. He insists that you answer personally or face legal consequences." Her voice remained steady, but a flicker of tension passed across her eyes. Beaumont, reading over her shoulder, only chuckled. "This is what I meant," he said. "He believes he can control the outcome. But now, every attempt he makes plays directly into our hands." Delilah May recognized the truth of his words. Every act of desperation from James Garrett, every threat or accusation, only reinforced her authority and demonstrated the depth of her newfound autonomy. Over the next few days, Delilah May prepared a careful response. She documented operations with precision, highlighting both successes and areas where James's instructions had been ignored or poorly executed. She sent the account to him through a trusted courier, ensuring that each page subtly emphasized his failures while demonstrating her competence. When the letter reached James, his reaction was explosive. Friends and neighbors later recalled seeing him ride furiously along the main road, his face flushed with anger and embarrassment. The carefully constructed facade of the Garrett family's superiority was beginning to crumble, and with it, the social standing James had long relied upon. Meanwhile, Delilah May continued her work at Beaumont's property, expanding her influence quietly but steadily. She reorganized the barn, implemented improved feeding schedules for the livestock, and began training the handlers in methods that enhanced the animals' value. The Morgan stallion, the very symbol of the courthouse transaction, moved with a proud and calm demeanor, reflecting the careful guidance and discipline she now instilled. One afternoon, Beaumont approached her as she inspected the paddocks. "You've done more than I anticipated," he said. "Not only is the property thriving, but the ripple effect in Palestine is beginning to show. He cannot ignore what is happening, and he cannot reverse it." Delilah May looked out over the fields, the sun casting long shadows over the fences and paddocks. She felt a strange mixture of satisfaction and apprehension. Their plan was working, but she knew that true resolution had not yet arrived. As October turned to November, the tension reached a new level. James Garrett, increasingly desperate, began questioning his advisors and workers. His decisions became erratic, his pride preventing him from seeking guidance or admitting failure. The contrast between the chaotic Garrett estate and the orderly, flourishing Beaumont property was impossible to ignore. Delilah May, once confined by her husband's demands, now held the power to shape events in a way that no one in Anderson County had anticipated. The people of Palestine watched from afar, unsure whether to admire her ingenuity or condemn the scandalous arrangement that had brought it about. Rumors spread like wildfire, and yet Delilah May remained calm, focused on the work that mattered, ensuring the property thrived and that every action taken by James Garrett highlighted the consequences of arrogance and cruelty. By the end of November, it was clear that the balance of power had shifted irreversibly. Delilah May Garrett, once a figure of quiet restraint and confinement, had become a woman of influence, intelligence, and determination. Beaumont's revenge was no longer a distant threat, It was a living, breathing reality, unfolding in every interaction and decision made by the man who had once considered himself untouchable. And somewhere deep in Palestine, James Garrett would learn that the cost of underestimating both a woman and a horse trader could extend far beyond financial loss. The web was complete, and the trap was tightening. If you want, I can immediately create part 9, which leads directly to the climax of James Garrett's downfall and the horrifying consequences of Beaumont's plan. Do you want me to do that next? Here's a fully modified and engaging part 9 of your horror historical story, written for an American YouTube audience in simple, easy-to-follow language. Part 9. The Reckoning Approaches. The first frost of November crept over the fields west of Palestine, leaving a thin layer of ice that glinted in the early morning sun. The Morgan stallion pawed at the ground impatiently, mist rising from his flanks as Delilah May Garrett moved among the horses, checking each animal's condition. There was a sharpness to the air, a tension that seemed to echo in every corner of Beaumont's property. Something was coming, though none of the household staff could yet name it. Delilah May herself felt it. She had grown accustomed to the rhythm of work and the subtle victories that had marked her rise in authority. Yet, beneath the calm exterior, a sense of anticipation coiled tightly within her. The months of careful planning, the meticulous documentation, and the quiet assertion of her influence had all been leading to a moment she could almost feel approaching. Back in Palestine, James Garrett's household was unraveling. Word of Delilah May's achievements had spread far and wide. Merchants and farmers alike whispered of her intelligence, of the way she had restored order to a property that had previously teetered on chaos. James had grown increasingly erratic, trying to assert control in ways that only exposed his failures. The letters he sent to Beaumont, once arrogant and commanding, now carried a frantic tone, laced with veiled threats and self-justifications. On the Beaumont property, Delilah May gathered the staff for a morning meeting. Curtis and Martin Yarbrough stood attentively, while Abraham handed out freshly written schedules. Everything must run smoothly today, she instructed. We are not just managing horses and household accounts. Every decision, every transaction, reflects not only on us but on the balance that has shifted between us and James Garrett. Her words carried weight. The men nodded, understanding that this was more than daily chores. Every action was part of a larger design. And for the first time, Delilah May felt the satisfaction of purpose beyond personal survival or household management. She was orchestrating a quiet, relentless reckoning. The day passed with routine work, yet each task felt imbued with strategy. Delilah May audited the horse feed, reconciled ledgers, and oversaw training sessions, all the while anticipating the ripple effects that her improvements would create in Palestine. By mid-afternoon, a courier arrived with a letter from James, delivered with haste and an air of panic. He demanded an immediate meeting, insisting that she return to Palestine to explain her actions and restore what he believed to be his rightful authority. Delilah May read the letter carefully, her eyes scanning every line for subtext, for weakness, for the telltale signs of desperation. She folded it neatly, handed it to Abraham, and said, "Prepare a formal response. He will see the truth without us leaving the property." Beaumont, who had been observing her every move from the porch, nodded approvingly. "You are no longer reacting," he said. "You are anticipating. That is the difference between surviving and prevailing." Delilah May allowed herself a small smile. The months of preparation, of quiet observation, of building influence, were now bearing fruit. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, the distant sounds of Palestine reached the property. The occasional carriage, the faint hum of conversation, and the whispers of curiosity carried on the wind. Delilah May understood that her influence extended far beyond the fences. Every shipment of supplies, every well-kept ledger, every efficiently trained horse was a reflection of her growing power, and James Garrett's growing impotence. The following morning, she called a meeting with Beaumont. "It is time we take the next step," she said. "The property runs smoothly, the staff follows instructions without question, and James is increasingly desperate. We need a demonstration that the balance of power has shifted permanently." Beaumont's eyes gleamed. "I thought you'd never say it," he replied. "We will remind him, in a way he cannot ignore, that the cost of arrogance extends far beyond pride." The courthouse transaction was merely the first act. What follows must leave an impression that cannot be erased. Plans were drawn with precision. Delilah May organized a series of demonstrations, showcasing the thriving Morgan stallion, the impeccable accounts, and the efficiency of the staff. She arranged for prominent merchants from Palestine to visit, ensuring that news of her competence would reach James indirectly. Intensifying his frustration, every detail was calculated to highlight his own failures while reinforcing her achievements. By the middle of November, the stage was set. A convoy of wagons arrived at Bowman's property, carrying visitors curious to witness the improvements. Delilah May guided them through the barns, the paddocks, and the household, explaining every innovation she had implemented. The visitors were amazed at the transformation. Horses were healthier, ledgers were accurate and complete, and the property ran with a smoothness that bordered on perfection. Word spread rapidly back to Palestine. James Garrett, hearing reports from friends and associates, could not believe the scale of Delilah May's influence. His attempts to intervene, to regain authority, only highlighted his inability to control the situation. Each failure stung his pride and eroded his reputation further. He began to realize that Bowman's calculated revenge had extended beyond a single transaction. The humiliation was complete, and it was public. Delilah May, meanwhile, found a new rhythm in her life. She had regained control over her body and her mind, shed the physical and mental confines of her previous existence, and emerged as a figure capable of influencing men and events alike. Her autonomy was absolute, and the knowledge that her actions were dismantling James Garrett's carefully constructed social standing brought a satisfaction she had never experienced in the Garrett household. As November drew to a close, Beaumont summoned Delilah May for a private conversation. "The endgame approaches," he said. "Soon, he will have no choice but to acknowledge the consequences of his actions. And you, Delilah, will stand as proof that underestimation can be fatal." She nodded. "It has been more than I imagined," she admitted. "The power of strategy, of patience, of knowing one's worth, it is intoxicating." Beaumont placed a hand on her shoulder. "Remember this. Never let pride blind you. Control comes not from fear, but from competence and confidence." The days that followed were tense. Every letter, every report, every visitor was a reminder of the irreversible shift. And somewhere in Palestine, James Garrett's anger, frustration, and pride were slowly consuming him. He had gambled his authority, misjudged both the woman he had underestimated and the man who orchestrated the plan, and now he was paying the ultimate price. The final act was drawing near. The reckoning that had begun with a simple courthouse transaction was about to reach its climax. Delilah May Garrett, once confined and underestimated, now held the power to expose the full extent of James Garrett's folly, and ensure that the consequences were felt for generations. The stage was set, the players were in place, and the final curtain was about to fall on a story that would be remembered in Anderson County for decades to come. If you want, I can create Part 10 next, the thrilling and shocking conclusion to this historic horror story, bringing all threads together for the ultimate climax. Do you want me to do that now? Here's the fully modified Part 10, the final part of your horror historical story, written for an American YouTube audience in simple, engaging language, complete with an opening hook and a call to action. Part 10. The Final Reckoning. It was a cold December morning in 1858 when Palestine awoke to a silence heavier than usual. The cotton fields lay frostbitten, the streets empty, and the town seemed to hold its breath. Everyone knew something extraordinary had been happening, yet no one could have predicted the conclusion. The story of Delilah May Garrett, Silas Beaumont, and James Garrett was about to reach its final, shocking chapter. Delilah May had become a force in her own right. Over the past months, she had transformed Bowman's property from a sprawling, loosely managed operation into a model of efficiency and wealth. Her insight, intelligence, and determination had made her indispensable. What few in Palestine realized was that this transformation was also the perfect instrument of Bowman's revenge. Every ledger corrected, every horse trained, every interaction with merchants in town amplified James Garrett's humiliation without a single confrontation. James Garrett, once a man of stature and influence, had become obsessed with his failure. He watched from a distance, hearing the reports, receiving letters, seeing friends and acquaintances whispering about the miraculous turnaround at Beaumont's property. His attempts to intervene were feeble, his pride shattered, and his anger growing daily. Each new accomplishment of Delilah May reminded him of the exchange at the courthouse, the Morgan stallion for his wife, and how utterly he had misjudged both her and Beaumont. On the morning of the final act, Beaumont invited James to his property under the guise of reconciliation. James arrived, his expression a mix of skepticism and thinly veiled rage. Delilah May stood at the edge of the main yard, overseeing the horses and the staff with a calm authority that made James feel smaller than he had ever felt in his life. Beaumont greeted him with polite courtesy, his Kentucky drawl masking the satisfaction that simmered beneath. "James, thank you for coming. I want you to see, in person, the results of your decisions." Delilah May stepped forward, her presence commanding. "Welcome, Mr. Garrett," she said. "I hope you will observe carefully. There are lessons here you might have learned too late otherwise." James's eyes darted between her and the Morgan stallion, which stood proudly in the paddock, the symbol of the courthouse exchange. But it was not the horse that held his attention. It was Delilah May herself, standing taller, more confident, her eyes sharp, her demeanor unyielding. He realized, perhaps for the first time, that she had not been a passive participant in his life. She had grown beyond him, beyond the constraints he had imposed. Beaumont led James on a tour of the property, showcasing every improvement, every innovation, every sign of Delilah May's skill. The staff moved with precision, the accounts were flawless, and the horses displayed strength and training that surpassed even James's expectations. Every detail was a reminder that the man who had believed himself clever in trading his wife for a horse had been thoroughly outmatched in intelligence, strategy, and foresight. As the tour concluded, Beaumont turned to James. "You see, this is not just about horses, or property, or even a single transaction. It is about understanding the consequences of pride, arrogance, and the underestimation of others." Delilah May stepped closer. "You believed you could control me, limit me, and dismiss me as a burden. You were wrong. And now, the truth is before you, plain for everyone to see." James's face twisted with rage and shame. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came that could justify his earlier decisions. His life of status, his years of planning and scheming, all seemed trivial compared to the presence of the woman he had underestimated. The town of Palestine, had it known, would have whispered for generations about this moment, the moment a woman reclaimed her agency, turned the tables, and humiliated a man whose ego had blinded him. Delilah May did not need to raise her voice. The quiet authority in her stance spoke louder than any words. Beaumont, meanwhile, watched with satisfaction. His plan had been simple yet elegant. The courthouse transaction, the careful cultivation of her abilities, the visible demonstration of competence, all designed to dismantle James Garrett's reputation while elevating Delilah May. Justice had been served without violence, without scandal, yet the impact was absolute. The final symbolic act occurred as the sun reached its zenith. Delilah May rode the Morgan stallion across the yard, demonstrating not only the horse's training but also her mastery. James watched helplessly, the reality of his loss fully sinking in. Beaumont called the staff together and ensured that James witnessed the seamless operation of the property, ledgers reconciled, horses groomed, tasks executed efficiently, all under Delilah May's supervision. For the first time, James understood the depth of his miscalculation. The humiliation he had feared, the gossip, the shame, the loss of social standing, was nothing compared to the revelation that he had been completely outmaneuvered. His pride, once the center of his identity, had become his undoing. As James rode back toward Palestine, he was silent. The streets he once navigated with confidence now felt alien. Neighbors, merchants, and friends could sense the shift in his status. Delilah May, in contrast, remained at Beaumont's property, a woman transformed. She had reclaimed her life, her health, and her purpose. She had become a figure of admiration, a symbol of strategic intelligence and personal resilience. The story of the Garrett Beaumont transaction would echo for decades. It was told in hushed voices in the market, remembered at gatherings, and passed down as a cautionary tale of pride, revenge, and the underestimated power of one determined woman. Delilah May Garrett's transformation was complete. She had endured betrayal, public exposure, and a life constrained by others' judgments. In doing so, she emerged victorious, her influence extending far beyond the fences of Beaumont's property. And so, the tale concluded not with violence, but with a quiet, unassailable triumph. Justice had been served, lessons were learned, and the names of Delilah May Garrett and Silas Beaumont became synonymous with cunning, strategy, and the inexorable consequences of underestimating those around you. If you found this story shocking and fascinating, make sure to subscribe for more forgotten chapters of American history. Share this video with friends who love strange and dark tales, and leave a comment below telling us what part of this story stunned you the most. History is full of secrets, and together we can uncover them.